The morning sun had barely risen when the black sedan rolled to a smooth stop outside the towering glass building of Oralia Global Holdings, one of the largest female-led conglomerates in the world. Commuters hurried along the sidewalks, clutching coffees and briefcases, but the car remained still, untouched by the chaos around it. Inside sat Leela Ainsworth, the 34-year-old CEO whose name carried the weight of unimaginable wealth and an ego to match. She looked flawless, navy suit tailored to perfection, hair in a sleek knot, expensive perfume diffusing softly in the enclosed cabin. But her expression was stiff with annoyance, as if the world had personally conspired to irritate her. On the driver's seat sat Rayan Malik, a quiet single father in his late 30s. His eyes held a calm depth, something peaceful yet alert. He wore a simple black suit that wasn't designer but kept impeccably neat. He always carried himself like someone who respected his job, even if his employer rarely respected him. "Ms. Ainsworth, we've arrived," he said gently. She didn't look at him. "Finally," she muttered under her breath. "You know, if you drove 2 minutes faster, I wouldn't be walking into meetings that could make or break billion-dollar contracts while checking my makeup in the car." Rayan remained patient. "Traffic was heavier than usual, ma'am." "There's always traffic," she snapped. "Excuses are easy, results are." Rayan nodded lightly. He wasn't offended. He'd learned long ago that some people spoke harshly not because they were cruel in nature, but because the pressure of their positions twisted their tone. Still, it didn't make the sting any softer. Leela opened the door but then paused, scrutinizing him with a disapproving frown. "And for heaven's sake, try not to stare while I'm applying makeup next time. It's weird." Rayan blinked slowly. "I was watching the road, ma'am." "Yeah, well, just don't." She slammed the door behind her and strutted toward the building entrance. Employees scrambled to greet her with polite smiles. She didn't acknowledge any of them. Inside the car, Rayan finally released a slow breath. He checked the photo wedged near the speedometer, a smiling girl missing her 2 front teeth. Alishba, his 7-year-old daughter. His entire reason for working 2 jobs. His dream was to provide her a life stable enough that she'd never feel the absence of the mother who had left years ago. He touched the picture lightly, whispering in Urdu, "Just a few more days till your school trip. Baba will arrange everything." His phone buzzed. A text from his sister. "Alishba is practicing her French homework. She's excited to show you." Rayan smiled. Most people at Oralia Global thought he was just a driver who could barely speak English fluently. But the truth was different, far different. He wasn't just bilingual. He spoke 9 languages. Not that he ever advertised it. People who underestimate you reveal who they are without you having to say a single word. He started the engine and gently eased the car away from the building. Upstairs on the 32nd floor, Leela stepped into her massive office overlooking the entire skyline. Her assistant rushed in, carrying a tablet loaded with documents. "Your 9 a.m. negotiation call has been moved up," the assistant said. "The Swiss delegation wants early discussion on the merger." Leela exhaled sharply. "Can people not follow a schedule? The world is not a playground." "Also," the assistant continued with caution, "the Japanese representatives have arrived in person. They assumed today was the final contract adjustment meeting." "What? That's not today." Leela rubbed her temples. "Who scheduled that? I swear the universe is conspiring to ruin my morning." "And finally, the Middle Eastern partners are arriving at exactly 9:30. They specifically said they want negotiations handled face-to-face." Leela let out an annoyed groan. "Perfect. Not 1, not 2, but 3 major international groups want my time today." She stormed toward the conference room. Her thoughts ran fast. If she made the wrong move, she could lose a $1.2 billion cross-continental partnership deal. Her shareholders would riot. Her board would question her leadership. Her competitors would start circling like vultures. And worst of all, she hated feeling unprepared. Unprepared made her feel weak, and weakness was something she despised more than anything. She barked to her assistant, "Tell Rayan to stay nearby. If I need to change locations, I don't want to wait." "Yes, ma'am." Leela didn't realize that the same man she treated like background furniture would soon become the most critical person in the building. Rayan parked the car near the loading zone and took out a small notebook. While waiting, he often practiced Arabic verses, polished his Russian grammar, or reviewed Spanish verb tenses. Today, he was scribbling in Korean, trying to memorize certain business phrases. Most people didn't know how he learned the languages. They assumed he was just a driver who happened to know a bit of Urdu or Punjabi. But his story was much longer. He grew up in a diplomatic household. His father was a translator for embassies, traveling frequently across regions. Rayan absorbed languages the same way children absorb music. Words fascinated him. He grew up speaking Urdu, English, Arabic, and Farsi. Later, he picked up French in school, Spanish from neighbors, Russian from a friend, and Japanese from online tutors. Korean came last during the pandemic. But life changed drastically after his father passed away. Debts grew. Opportunities shrank. His daughter was born prematurely, requiring costly medical care. He took any work he could find, and driving offered flexible hours. He never regretted it. Dignity wasn't in the job title. It was in the intention behind the work. While he practiced his words, the building entrance suddenly burst open. Two security guards shouted into radios. Staff rushed around in panic. Rayan looked up. Something was wrong. Inside the conference hall, Leela was frozen in place. Kazuto Mori, the Japanese chief negotiator, had just asked her something critical, something she should have been prepared for, something she needed to answer precisely if she wanted the deal to remain alive. But she had no idea what he said. Because he had spoken in Japanese. Not the basic slow English she expected. Not the rehearsed statements from earlier meetings. He had switched to rapid, native Japanese, discussing a potential contract clause risk involving cultural misunderstandings and cross-border legal restraint. Her translators were late. Her assistant was outside the room. Her mind raced. Her palms grew damp. Her jaw tightened. Why of all days did he have to do this today? Kazuto raised an eyebrow, waiting for her response. CEO Ainsworth, this point is vital. Your silence concerns us. She swallowed hard. Of course. Yes, I completely follow what you said. She did not. His team exchanged skeptical glances. Not good. Not good at all. Then the Swiss delegation walked in early, speaking German to each other. Then the Middle Eastern partners' representative called, speaking only Arabic. 3 different cultures. 3 different languages. 3 different expectations. 1 CEO. And no translator. Her confidence evaporated. Then someone opened the conference room door. A quiet voice spoke. Soft. Calm. Steady. Ma'am, you requested me to stay nearby. Should I get the car? It was Rayan. But before she could snap at him for interrupting, one of the Swiss delegates glanced at him and muttered something under his breath in German. Rayan responded instantly. In fluent German. Then Kazuto said something sharply in Japanese, assuming Rayan didn't understand. Rayan responded flawlessly. In Japanese, bowing respectfully. The Middle Eastern representative on the screen greeted him uncertainly in Arabic. Rayan replied in eloquent Arabic, using formal dialect. Silence fell. Everyone stared at the driver, who was suddenly speaking languages like he'd breathed them since birth. Leela's jaw dropped. Her heart pounded. Her ego cracked. She whispered, What did you just do?" Rayan blinked innocently. "I responded, ma'am." "You speak all of those?" "9 languages," he said quietly. "Would you like me to translate?" The delegates leaned forward, interested, very interested. Kazuto smiled for the first time. "Your driver is impressive, Ms. Ainsworth," he said in English. Leela forced a tight, awkward smile. "Yes, he is unexpectedly talented." Rayan pretended not to notice her embarrassment. The Swiss partner stepped forward. "If he can translate everything in real time, we can finalize the last unresolved clause today." The Middle Eastern representative added, "Yes, with someone so multilingual, we can avoid misunderstandings." Leela's brain screamed. She wanted to maintain authority. She wanted control. But she had no choice. If she refused Rayan's help, she'd look insecure and foolish. And worse, she might lose the deal. She forced the words out. "Mr. Malik, I would appreciate your assistance." Rayan bowed his head gently. "Of course, ma'am." He stepped forward, positioned himself between the parties, and in a calm, measured tone, began translating flawlessly. German to English. Japanese to English. Arabic to English. English back to their languages. Suddenly the chaotic meeting became smooth. Every eyebrow raised, every tension eased, every misunderstanding cleared. While Leela stood there, partly relieved, partly humiliated, and partly furious with herself for ever mocking him. She couldn't stop replaying her own words. "Try not to stare while I apply makeup, it's weird. You drove too slow. You're always making excuses." Now, she felt like she'd been slapped with her own arrogance. Hard. As Rayan translated complex legal and financial nuances, the room shifted. Everyone respected him, listened to him, trusted him. They didn't see a driver. They saw value. Real value. Leela swallowed her pride as she watched him. He wasn't just a driver. He was the reason this negotiation was still alive. And she had no idea who he really was. The conference room that had felt suffocating minutes earlier was now transformed into a space alive with precise communication, eased tensions, and unexpected clarity. Rayan stood calmly at the center, shifting seamlessly between languages as if he were simply inhaling one and exhaling another. His voice remained steady, never rushed, never uncertain. The elegance of his translations sharpened every clause, softened every misunderstanding, and synchronized every cultural expectation. Meanwhile, near the head of the table, Leela tried her best to maintain the appearance of a composed CEO. But internally, a storm raged. She watched the man she had dismissed repeatedly, mocked repeatedly, effortlessly salvage negotiations she had believed were one signature away from collapse. His posture was humble, but his skill was undeniable. The more he spoke, the more her chest tightened with the realization that she didn't truly know the man she'd made assumptions about. Somewhere in the far corner of the room, her assistant stood frozen, eyes widened, unsure whether to jump in, hide, or take notes. No one dared interrupt. The Swiss delegate, Herr Klossmann, tapped his pen thoughtfully, glancing at Rayan with genuine respect. "Your phrasing is impeccable. Not many native German speakers understand the distinction between Vertragsbindung and Bindungswirkung, but you clarified it perfectly." Rayan nodded modestly. "Thank you, sir. My father worked with international contracts in Berlin for a few years. I picked up the nuances." Leela blinked. Berlin. She had never heard him speak of any background beyond, "I drive full-time and take care of my daughter." To her, he had been another employee with a quiet life and an unremarkable resume. She felt a twist of embarrassment at how confidently she judged someone without knowing a sliver of their history. Then Kazuto stepped forward, adjusting his glasses. "Your translation of the contingency clause into Japanese was beyond accurate. You captured the spirit of the language. That takes rare sensitivity. Rayan bowed respectfully. My Japanese tutor used to say that to speak the language, you must also bow your heart. I try. The room softened with smiles. Leela felt a knot of discomfort tightening in her stomach, not toward Rayan, but toward herself. She could feel the invisible mirror being held in front of her face, and she didn't like the woman staring back. Still, she couldn't let emotions interfere now. The negotiation was everything. The board had already questioned her leadership enough this year. This deal had to succeed. Let's continue, she said, forcing authority into her voice. Mr. Malik, please monitor the tone of each party. We cannot afford misinterpretation. Rayan nodded and resumed his place. What followed was a long stretch of intense discussion. When the Swiss representative explained the financial protections in German, Rayan translated with precision, ensuring the Japanese side heard the exact intent and not merely the words. When the Japanese legal counsel expressed cultural hesitations, he softened the phrasing in Arabic to avoid sounding disrespectful. When the Middle Eastern partners voiced concerns about shared liabilities, he reframed the explanation in French for additional clarity. He switched between tongues so fluidly that sometimes the delegates forgot which language had started the sentence. For hours, Rayan stood as the bridge holding three empires together. He wasn't just translating words, he was translating trust. Eventually, the meeting broke for a 15-minute recess. The delegates stepped outside, discussing among themselves in low murmurs, mostly praise, mostly regarding that multilingual man who speaks like a scholar. Rayan remained inside, taking a sip of water, massaging his stiff fingers. Translating for so long without rest was exhausting, but he hid the fatigue well. Leela stood nearby, watching him in silence. She wasn't used to feeling indebted to anyone. It was an unnatural sensation, a vulnerable one. She hated vulnerability more than she hated inefficiency. But she walked toward him anyway. Mr. Malik, she started, keeping her tone crisp. He turned politely, yes, ma'am. She hesitated. Her throat tightened around the words she wasn't used to saying. You handled the meeting well. Rayan offered a small, humble smile. I'm glad I could help. You did more than help, she admitted reluctantly. You prevented a disaster. He nodded gently, not needing praise. Your negotiation points were strong. They only needed clarity. Leela's jaw clenched slightly. Clarity I should have provided myself. Rayan didn't reply. He simply waited. I misjudged you, she said finally. I assumed, but the words felt too heavy, too exposing. She couldn't finish. Rayan, seeing her discomfort, softened the moment. It happens, ma'am. People often assume I don't know much because I speak quietly. No, she said sharply. It wasn't your quietness, it was my arrogance. He didn't say anything. And she hated how that silence made the truth echo louder. After a beat, she added, why didn't you ever tell me you spoke so many languages? You never asked, he said simply. The answer hit her harder than expected. She had spent months giving orders, issuing complaints, pointing out small inefficiencies, but never once had she tried to know the person driving her. Not his history, not his skills, not his ambitions, not even his struggles as a single father. Not a thing. His presence had been invisible to her because she'd chosen not to look. A flush of embarrassment burned up her neck. Well, she finally said, avoiding his eyes, we still have half the negotiation left. Stay ready. I'm here whenever needed, Rayan replied, without resentment, without bitterness, just quiet professionalism. That somehow made her feel worse. When the recess ended, the delegates returned. Their faces were lighter now, the tension replaced with cautious optimism. Kazuto sat first, straightening his papers. With Mr. Malik assisting, I believe we can finalize today. The Swiss partners nodded. "We agree." The Middle Eastern representative spoke warmly through the speaker. "Let us proceed with full cooperation." Leela straightened, refocused. "Let's resolve the liability structure first." And the marathon resumed. The next 3 hours were a world of numbers, clauses, and cultural considerations. Every time one side grew tense, Rayan's precise phrasing soothed the room. Every time a legal expression needed nuance, he supplied it before anyone asked. Every time an argument began forming, he bridged it before it erupted. Even the delegates began addressing him more than the CEO. "Mr. Malik, does this clause maintain parity in German context? Could you express this softer in Japanese? Is there a more respectful Arabic variant of this sentence?" Leela noticed every detail. It stung, but it also humbled her. By early afternoon, the impossible had happened. They had resolved every major point. The 1.2B partnership was alive and stronger than ever. The delegates stood up, shaking hands, exchanging polite bows and appreciative glances. Several insisted on taking photos with Rayan, claiming it was rare to meet someone with such mastery of language and diplomacy. Rayan obliged politely, though he disliked cameras, knowing his daughter would ask about the pictures later. Kazuto turned to Leela. "Your company is fortunate to have someone like him." She forced a smile. "Yes, I am fully aware now." Klossman added to Rayan, "If you ever seek employment in international consultancy, here is my card." Another delegate chimed in, "Or our embassy would welcome a linguist like you." And another, "Have you considered joining global negotiations? You have the potential." Rayan accepted the business cards with respectful nods, but no promises. Leela watched silently. Each compliment felt like a reminder of her blindness. Each job offer felt like the universe telling her how little she'd valued her own people. When the delegates finally exited, her office felt too large, too quiet, too heavy with self-reflection. She looked at the man standing by the window, hands clasped behind his back, waiting for instructions like nothing extraordinary had happened. "Rayan," she said softly. "Yes, ma'am." "You saved the deal." He didn't say anything. "You saved my credibility." Still silent. "You saved this company." He shook his head lightly. "No, ma'am, I just translated." She felt something twist inside her. "You did far more than that." A long pause. Then unexpectedly, her voice cracked just a little. "I owe you an apology." Rayan turned fully to face her. "For what?" "For everything." He didn't smile, he didn't gloat, he didn't say, "I told you so." He didn't make her shame heavier. Instead, he simply nodded. "Thank you for saying that." That was it. No drama. No bitterness. Just dignity. And it struck her more than anger ever could. Before she could say anything else, her assistant knocked on the glass door. "Ma'am, the board wants you in the executive hall. They heard the deal was finalized and want the full story." Leela straightened. The board, of course. They would want details. They would want explanations. They would want credit distribution. She looked at Rayan. "Come with me. You deserve recognition." He shook his head gently. "No, ma'am, it's your victory, not mine." She stepped closer. "It's not this time." Rayan smiled faintly. "You lead the company. I just served where needed." She felt something stubborn tighten inside her. "I insist." But he replied softly, "Please, let me return to my duties." And that quiet humility left her stunned again. He wasn't chasing validation. He wasn't hungry for credit. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He simply wanted to work honorably. That kind of character was rare, so rare she couldn't remember the last time she'd seen it. She inhaled slowly, nodded once, and watched him walk toward the elevator. But as the doors closed behind him, Something new stirred in her chest. Respect. Genuine, unfiltered respect. The kind she had never imagined she would feel for a man she once mocked, without a second thought. She didn't know this was only the beginning. Things were about to get far more complicated and far more transforming. For them both. When Rayan left the 32nd floor conference hall, he expected to feel a sense of relief. Instead, a subtle heaviness lingered on his shoulders. Maybe it was the mental exhaustion of switching between languages for hours. Maybe it was the sudden attention from men who controlled global markets. Or maybe, deep down, he sensed that something had shifted permanently in the building he worked in. He walked into the elevator, loosened his tie slightly, and leaned his head against the cool metal wall. His phone buzzed. A picture from his sister, Alishba, sitting at a small desk, writing in her notebook with a bright grin. "Papa, I learned a new French sentence today. Want to hear it later?" Fatigue melted into warmth. He typed back, "Of course, John, Baba can't wait." Then he slipped the phone back into his pocket as the elevator took him toward the basement parking area. Meanwhile, on the 32nd floor, the board members gathered in the executive hall, an oversized room with glass walls, marble floors, and a long oak table too large for comfort. As Leela entered, the directors, mostly older, mostly male, turned with expressions ranging from curiosity to subtle skepticism. "Ms. Ainsworth," said Chairman Barrett, adjusting his gold-framed glasses, "we've been informed you finalized all 3 international agreements today." "Yes," she replied, maintaining her composed demeanor. "And without delays?" another asked. "None." A murmur rippled around the room. Barrett leaned forward. "We heard rumors there were complications this morning." She hesitated. Lying wouldn't help. There were unexpected linguistic obstacles. Our translators were unavailable, and several delegates switched to native languages. "And yet you resolved it," he pressed. Leela inhaled. Her pride twitched, resisting the truth she needed to say. The negotiation succeeded because of an unexpected resource. "Resource?" Barrett repeated. "Which department?" She swallowed her ego. "Not a department, a person." "Who?" She exhaled. "My driver." Silence hit the room like a dropped boulder. "A driver? You mean the chauffeur?" "You're joking." Leela clenched her fists under the table. "He speaks 9 languages. He translated everything in real time and resolved cultural misunderstandings. Without him, we would have lost millions, and possibly the entire partnership." The board exchanged baffled looks. Barrett raised an eyebrow. "Why is a multilingual talent working as a driver here?" Leela didn't have an answer that wouldn't expose her own arrogance. Her silence said enough. Barrett tapped a pen. "We'd like to meet him." "He left for the day," she replied quickly. "He wasn't aware you'd want his presence." "Well, arrange a meeting. If he prevented a $1.2 billion disaster, we need to evaluate his potential role." "Of course," she said stiffly. But inside she felt something else stirring: protectiveness, fear, and unease. If the board wanted to pull him away to another department, another role, or another executive, would he accept? He had every reason to leave her service after how she had treated him. And that thought unsettled her more than expected. Downstairs, Rayan leaned against his car, breathing in the colder air of the parking garage. He needed a moment of quiet before returning home. But peace didn't last long. A sharp, anxious voice called out, echoing through the concrete. "Hey, Mr. Malik." He turned. It was Jenna, the CEO's assistant, rushing toward him in heels she was clearly not trained to run in. "You need to come back," she panted. Rayan frowned gently. "Is something wrong?" "The board wants to meet you." He blinked. "Me?" "Yes, you." She gulped air dramatically. "You're the reason the deal went through, They want to know how you managed it. Rayan felt a small ache of dread. Attention was the last thing he wanted. He preferred quiet contribution, not spotlight. His father had always warned him. Son, the world notices talent only to use it. Protect your heart and protect your peace. He nodded at Jenna. Tell them I'll come tomorrow morning. Her eyes widened. You're saying no. I'm saying I'm tired, he answered softly, offering a polite smile. And I have somewhere important to be. Without waiting for further insistence, he opened the car door and slid inside. Jenna stood frozen. Leela is going to have a heart attack. But Rayan didn't hear her. He was already driving away. 30 minutes later, he parked outside a modest brick apartment building on the edge of town. It wasn't luxury, but it was safe, stable, quiet. On the second floor, a little girl heard her father's familiar footsteps and ran to the door before he could knock. Baba, she squealed. Rayan knelt just in time before Alishba flew into his arms, hugging him tightly. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the fatigue wash out of him. Nothing in the corporate world, no deal, no meeting, no billion-dollar pressure, compared to the warmth of her small arms. I missed you, he murmured, kissing her forehead. She pulled his cheek. I missed you more. His sister appeared from the living room. You look exhausted. Long day. He gave a half smile. Longer than usual. Eat something, I'll heat the food. But before he could respond, Alishba tugged his sleeve. Baba, listen, I learned French. She cleared her throat dramatically. Je suis très heureuse aujourd'hui. Rayan's face lit up with pride. Très bien, ma petite étoile. She giggled. What does that mean? My little star. She blushed and buried her face in his chest. He stroked her hair gently. This right here was why he worked, why he endured, why he stayed humble through every insult and belittling comment. His sacrifices weren't for wealth, recognition, or validation. They were for her. That night after dinner, after homework help, after bedtime stories, after his sister went home, and after Alishba finally drifted to sleep with her hand curled around his shirt, he sat alone in the dim kitchen. He rubbed his eyes. He should sleep. But his mind wouldn't rest. Because he knew something had changed at work, something irreversible. And tomorrow, the aftermath would begin. The next morning, the atmosphere at Orlia Global felt different the moment he arrived. Security guards greeted him with unusual politeness. Employees who normally walked past him without a glance now stopped and nodded respectfully. Even the receptionist who once avoided direct eye contact said, "Good morning, sir." Sir. He didn't know what to do with that. When the elevator opened onto the executive floor, people stared at him like he was some kind of celebrity. Jenna rushed over. Thank God you came. She's been packing like a tiger. Ms. Ainsworth, he asked gently. No worse the board. He exhaled softly. Let's not keep them waiting. She guided him toward the executive hall. Inside, 12 board members sat in a semicircle, visibly intrigued as he entered. Barrett motioned him forward. Mr. Malik, the chairman began. We've heard exceptional things about your performance yesterday. Rayan nodded respectfully. I was happy to assist. That's an understatement, Barrett said. You salvaged a multinational partnership on a moment's notice. We would like to understand your background, your resume, your training. Rayan clasped his hands behind him. My father was a diplomatic translator. I grew up learning languages. I never received formal certification, but I practiced extensively. So you're self-taught. Barrett's tone held disbelief. Partly, but language immersion was part of my upbringing. Another board member leaned forward. Would you consider working in a different department, something more fitting your skills? Leela stiffened slightly at the question. Rayan's voice remained gentle. I appreciate the offer, truly, But my current job gives me flexibility to care for my daughter. I value that more than a title. Barrett studied him carefully. We could adjust schedules. No need, Rayan replied softly. I'm content where I am. Whispers spread around the room. The board members had expected ambition, negotiation, a request for promotion or opportunity. Instead, they encountered a man who was proud of his work, not desperate to escape it. Barrett leaned back. Very well, but your abilities will not be ignored. Expect reassignment to support future international engagements. Rayan nodded. Whatever you require, I will serve. The board dismissed him kindly. As he turned to leave, one of the older members whispered to Barrett, That's not a driver, that's an asset. Outside the hall, Leela was waiting. She didn't speak until he stood directly in front of her. You refused their offers, she said quietly. Yes, he replied. Why? Because my daughter needs me, he answered simply. A higher role means less time. I'm not willing to trade that. She stared at him, something softening inside her unexpectedly. But you deserve more. He gave a small smile. What I deserve isn't always what I want. Her breath caught in her chest. He wasn't like anyone she'd ever worked with. He wasn't driven by ego, ambition, or social status. He wasn't trying to rise up, compete, or impress. He was grounded in something far deeper. And she felt strangely drawn to that groundedness. She cleared her throat, trying to regain her composure. Regardless, I owe you a lot. You owe me nothing, ma'am. No, she insisted, voice softening. I do, and I want to make things right. He looked at her with quiet curiosity. Come to my office, she said. We need to talk. As he followed her down the long glass hallway, something invisible shifted between them. Not warmth, not friendship, not attraction, not yet, but something more subtle. A crack in the wall she had built around herself, and a quiet respect he had earned without ever demanding it. What neither of them knew was that the events of the next 48 hours would pull them into a turning point neither could have predicted. And one of them would soon face a danger far greater than corporate pressure. When Arthur stepped out of the boardroom that day, the world felt strangely quiet, as if someone had turned down the volume of life itself. He walked through the long, marbled hallway of Leclerc International's top floor, each footstep echoing just a little too loudly. His mind wasn't in the building anymore. It wasn't even in the city. It kept drifting to a small, sunlit kitchen back home, where a teenage girl with soft brown hair and headphones too big for her head would be hunched over her homework, waiting for him to come home with that gentle, tired smile she pretended she didn't practice in the mirror. Elena. Every choice he made, every job he took, every humiliation he endured, every insult he swallowed, everything was ultimately for her. But today felt different. Today didn't feel like a sacrifice. Today felt like the world had cracked open and light was finally seeping through. He reached the elevator, pressed the button, and waited while the polished chrome doors reflected a version of himself he hardly recognized. He still looked like a driver, still wore the same gray suit, still had the same quietly weathered eyes, but something in his posture had changed. His shoulders weren't bent. His chin wasn't dipped. Something inside him had straightened. The elevator chimed, and he stepped inside, expecting the ride down to be uneventful. But before the doors closed, they stopped, held open from the outside. It was Morgan. She didn't say anything at first, just stepped in slowly, as if approaching a warning sign she wasn't sure how to interpret. When the doors slid shut behind them, she stood with her back pressed against the mirrored wall, arms folded, gaze narrowed but uncertain. Arthur kept his eyes forward. She tried to speak twice before anything came out. So she finally said, the words stretched and brittle. Arthur remained silent. He did not trust the sudden softness in her voice. He did not trust that this wasn't just another moment she would twist into a lesson about hierarchy. "You saved the company today," she said quietly. He didn't respond. Her eyes flicked toward him. "I'm saying that to you directly, not as your boss, not as whatever I've been to you. I'm saying it as a person." Arthur's fingers tightened around the folder he was holding. "You don't owe me anything," he murmured. "That's the problem." She pushed off the wall and stood straighter. "I think I do." He finally turned toward her, and their eyes met in the reflection. Her sharp, blue gaze softened by something he had never seen from her before, and his dark brown eyes filled with a cautious, tired patience. "I misjudged you," she said quietly. "Badly." Arthur didn't react, but the silence almost felt heavy with the words he wasn't saying. "You're the reason Hiroshi stayed," she continued. "He didn't stay for my pitch. He didn't stay for our numbers. He stayed because you treated him the way human beings are supposed to treat each other." Arthur lowered his gaze. "Respect is free," he said simply. "It costs nothing, but withholding it that can cost everything." The elevator kept descending, and the quiet hummed around them like a thin layer of tension that neither knew how to breach. "I know I've been difficult," Morgan said, though it was clear the word she wanted to use was far harsher. "But I wasn't always like this." Arthur didn't smile, but there was something like understanding in the tilt of his head. People change when they're protecting something. Morgan blinked, caught off guard. "How do you know I'm protecting anything?" "Because you remind me of myself," he said simply. "Before I learned that not everything can be carried alone." She swallowed hard, not expecting honesty that clean. "You have a daughter, right? I saw the drawing in your car." At that, Arthur's expression softened, really softened, for the first time that day. "She's everything," he whispered. The elevator slowed as they reached the lobby. Morgan didn't know what to say, so she just watched him for a moment. This man who spoke 9 languages, drove a car through the city like he was guiding a ship through storms, protected his child with more quiet ferocity than she'd ever seen, and still walked like the world didn't owe him a thing. When the doors opened, he stepped out first. She followed close behind. The receptionist looked up, clearly aware that something strange was happening, because never before had Morgan LeClaire followed a driver out of an elevator like a student chasing a teacher. Arthur adjusted his coat, preparing to leave. "Arthur," Morgan said, stopping him before he reached the doors, "I need to ask you something." He paused. She walked closer, not above him, not ordering him, just standing in front of him as one human talking to another. "Why didn't you say anything when I talked down to you? You could have corrected me. You could have told me you weren't just a driver." "Because your opinion of me didn't change who I was," Arthur replied. "And because I didn't take this job to be admired. I took it because it let me keep my daughter safe. That was enough." Morgan stared at him, stunned by the simplicity of his truth. It made her own excuses feel thin. Arthur nodded politely and moved toward the glass doors, ready to disappear back into the city, back into a world where people like him were invisible. But Morgan stepped closer again. "Wait." He looked back. "I wasn't protecting myself," she said quietly. "You were right, but you were also wrong. I wasn't protecting something." Her voice dropped, almost admitting a confession she had held her breath around for years. "I was protecting nothing, protecting a hollow space. The more powerful I became, the emptier it all felt. Every year, every quarter, every deal, it all felt like climbing stairs that didn't lead anywhere." Arthur didn't judge her. He didn't smile. He simply listened, patiently, the way people only listen when they have spent years learning to hear what goes unspoken. "I'm sorry," she said again. "Not as a CEO, as a person who forgot what people matter for." Arthur inclined his head. Apology accepted. Something unspoken passed between them, a shift in the air, a loosening in the chest. Then Morgan exhaled, long and tired. "There's one more thing," she said. "I'm not finished making this right." Arthur frowned slightly. You don't need to. But I want to, she cut in. He hesitated, unsure what to expect, but she didn't give an explanation. She simply walked toward the reception desk, grabbed her phone, and sent a single message. Moments later, the head of HR came rushing down the hallway, eyes wide. Ms. LeClaire, you needed. Morgan pointed at Arthur. Starting today, open a new role, Cultural Liaison Director. HR blinked. What? Someone who can act as an international bridge with partner clients. Someone with fluency in multiple languages. Someone with a life-earned understanding of diplomacy. Arthur froze. Morgan turned back toward him. And you're the first candidate, if you want it. Arthur stared at her, really stared at her, as if trying to determine if this was another test, another moment meant to make him small again. But there was no malice in her eyes, only sincerity. Think about it, she added softly, but I hope you'll say yes. Arthur opened his mouth, but just as he did, his phone buzzed. A text from his daughter. Dad, can we get ice cream, PLS? He exhaled through his nose, a warm and helpless smile tugging at his lips. Morgan saw it. Go, she said gently, she's waiting for you. For the first time in a long time, Arthur walked out of the building with a lightness he couldn't hide. The city air felt different, brighter, fuller. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He didn't know if he'd accept the position. He didn't know how the world would change now that someone had finally seen him. But as he stepped into his car, started the engine, and prepared to drive toward his daughter, he knew one thing without doubt. Something had shifted, for him, for Morgan, for the company, for a future he had never expected to have. And somewhere high above, behind the top-floor windows, Morgan watched him drive away, hands in her pockets, eyes fixed on a man she had once dismissed as nothing more than a wheel in her machine. Yet now, for the first time, she realized. He might be the only person in her entire empire who had no idea he was the reason it didn't collapse today. She let out a breath and whispered to the empty room. Thank you, Arthur. And the city swallowed the sound. Arthur didn't sleep that night. Not because he was troubled, not because something gnawed at him, but because for the first time in what felt like years, his mind was too full of possibilities to rest. He lay on his back in the dim glow of his small apartment, the soft hum of the refrigerator drifting faintly through the quiet space, and stared at the ceiling as memories swirled like dust in sunlight. He kept thinking about the moment Morgan had offered him the Cultural Liaison Director position, a job title he had never dreamed of, never planned for, never thought someone like him would even be allowed to imagine. He tried to picture himself walking through LeClaire International's upper floors in a tailored suit, not as a driver slipping past executives unnoticed, but as someone they'd nod to with acknowledgement, someone whose voice mattered in the room. He tried to imagine introducing himself to clients, not as "Sir, I'll be waiting downstairs," but as "I'll be overseeing this negotiation." The idea felt foreign. Not because he didn't believe he was capable, but because the world had never made space for him to believe it. His life had been shaped by survival, by necessity, by the quiet sacrifices made in the shadows where no applause ever reached. Jobs weren't choices, they were obligations. Opportunities weren't gifts, they were illusions other people received. People like him didn't climb ladders. They held them steady while others climbed. But now the ladder seemed to be turned toward him. As he lay there, he heard soft footsteps outside his door, then a gentle knock. "Dad," came a small voice. Arthur sat up immediately. "Come in, sweetheart." Alina pushed the door open and padded inside in her fluffy socks and oversized t-shirt, hair messed from sleep. She climbed into bed beside him and laid her head on his chest. "You didn't sleep," she mumbled. "I'm okay," he reassured, wrapping his arm around her. "Just thinking." Her fingers played absently with the fabric of his shirt. "About what?" Arthur hesitated, unsure how to explain something that still felt surreal, even in his own mind. "I've been offered a new role at work," he said carefully. She lifted her head. "A better job." He nodded. Her eyes brightened instantly. "Will you take it?" "I don't know yet," he said honestly. "It's a big change." Elena frowned. "But good change, right?" "I think so," he murmured. She shifted, sitting up fully, turning so she could look at him face to face. "Dad, you always tell me that I shouldn't be scared of things just because they're new." Her voice took on a wise, serious note she had inherited from him without realizing. "You say that every big thing starts small, so maybe this is your big thing." Arthur couldn't help the soft, overwhelmed smile that pulled at his lips. "When did you get so smart?" "I've always been smart," she said proudly. "You just notice it more when you listen." He chuckled, pulling her into a hug. She squeezed him tightly before flopping back down onto the bed. "Whatever you decide," she said sleepily, "I'm still proud of you." Her words warmed him deeper than any promotion ever could. After she drifted back to her room, Arthur lay awake a little longer, replaying her words in his mind. Her belief in him was stronger than his doubt, stronger than the quiet fear that whispered he wasn't meant for more, that life would punish him for daring to reach beyond the role it had assigned him. He closed his eyes. By morning, his decision was made. The next day at LeClaire International carried a heavy tension. Rumors had rippled through the building like sparks through dry leaves. Everyone had heard about the disastrous near collapse during the meeting with Hiroshi Takeda. Everyone had heard that something unexpected had saved the day. They just didn't know what or who. The answer walked through the revolving doors just after 8 a.m. Arthur, still wearing his driver's suit, still carrying the quiet dignity that made people step aside without realizing why. But today, people looked at him longer, some with confusion, some with curiosity, a few with something sharper, envy, suspicion, or discomfort at seeing someone they had always stepped over now walking among them with an ease that suggested their old labels had lost their grip. He approached the front desk, and the receptionist immediately straightened in her seat. "Good morning, Mr. Hale," she said, far more politely than usual. He blinked at the formality. "Good morning. Ms. LeClaire asked me to take you up as soon as you arrive." Arthur hesitated, not out of fear, but because respect wasn't something he was used to receiving from this building. It felt almost like wearing a shirt that didn't belong to him, strange against the skin. He followed her to the elevator, and she swiped her keycard to access the executive level. When he stepped inside, he felt the weight of invisible eyes from the lobby tracking him until the doors slid shut. When he reached the top floor, he found Morgan waiting near the windows, a cup of black coffee in her hand, hair tied back in a low bun, expression composed but sharper than usual, like she had been awake most of the night as well. She turned when she heard his footsteps. "You came," she said softly. Arthur nodded. Morgan gestured toward her office. "Let's talk." He followed her inside. The last time he'd been in this room, it was to drive her home after a 12-hour shift. Back then, the space felt like an otherworldly place, untouchable, distant, belonging to a life beyond his reach. But today it felt simply like a room. Morgan closed the door behind them, then leaned against her desk. For a few seconds, neither spoke. The quiet hung thick but not uncomfortable, more like a pause that mattered. "I thought you wouldn't come," she said finally. "I wasn't sure if I should," Arthur replied. "But someone reminded me that fear isn't a good enough reason not to try." Morgan smiled faintly. "Smart daughter." "The smartest," he said with pride. She straightened, all business now. "Arthur, I meant what I said yesterday. The position is real. HR has the paperwork ready, but I need to be clear about something before you decide." He nodded, bracing himself. "This job won't be easy," she said. "You'll be sitting across from people who have spent their whole lives being told they're important, People who expect flawless negotiation skills. People who'll try to test you. Some will underestimate you. Some will resent you. Some will be threatened by you. Arthur met her gaze steadily. That doesn't scare me. Good, she said, because I need someone who can handle that. He took a slow breath. Why me? Morgan didn't sugarcoat her answer. Because you did something yesterday that no one in this building, including me, could do. You didn't speak 9 languages. You connected with someone. You made him feel seen. And that's not a skill you can fake or buy. That's a rare gift. Arthur absorbed that quietly, humbled. And secondly, she added, because you understand people better than anyone I've met in years. Not clients, not employees, people. Arthur looked down. I've spent my life trying to understand them. It was the only way to survive. Morgan's voice softened. Exactly. He lifted his gaze again. I'll take the job. For a moment she didn't respond. Her expression flickered, relief, pride, something softer beneath it. Then she nodded. Welcome to the executive team, Arthur. The word struck him in a place he didn't know existed. Executive team, him. He inhaled deeply, steadying the swirl of emotions rising behind his ribs. I'll do my best, he said. Morgan smiled, not the cold, polished smile she wore for cameras, but a genuine one that reached her eyes. I know you will. She walked to her desk, pulled out the paperwork and handed him a folder. He opened it, scanning the neatly printed job description, salary, responsibilities. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of a life changing in real time. Is this correct? He asked quietly. It's fair, she replied. More than fair, I hope. It's life-changing. I know. He signed the offer. It felt like stepping into sunlight after living years in a doorway. Morgan extended her hand. He shook it, firm and steady. You start Monday, she said. But today, we'll begin with simple introductions. I want you to meet the senior team. I won't pretend they'll all welcome you with open arms, but I'll make one thing clear. You're here because I trust you. Arthur nodded. I'm ready. Good, she gestured toward the door. Let's go. If the executive conference room had been tense yesterday, it was nothing compared to the atmosphere today. 9 executives sat around the long glass table, all in tailored suits, all with expressions that said, "What is he doing here?" Morgan entered first. Arthur followed. The room went silent. Morgan stepped aside slightly, giving Arthur space, but also silently declaring he wasn't standing behind her now. He was standing beside her. Everyone, she began, her voice calm but authoritative. This is Arthur Hale. Effective immediately, he is joining our leadership team as Cultural Liaison Director. One man on the left raised his brows sharply. A woman at the end shifted uncomfortably. A few exchanged glances they thought were discreet. Morgan ignored them. Yesterday, she continued, we came dangerously close to losing one of our biggest deals. And while some of you think it was saved by chance or luck, let me make this very clear. It wasn't luck. It was him. She nodded at Arthur. He restored a relationship in minutes that we nearly destroyed in months. The executives looked at Arthur again, but this time with something different behind their eyes. Acknowledgement. Maybe even respect. Arthur didn't boast. He didn't step forward. He simply bowed his head slightly, the same quiet humility that had once made him invisible now working like a shield. We'll integrate him into upcoming deals, Morgan concluded. I expect you all to cooperate fully. The meeting proceeded, but something had shifted in the hierarchy of the room. Arthur listened, took notes, watched the dynamics, read the unspoken power lines between departments, and to his quiet surprise he understood. He saw the missing pieces. He saw the gaps in communication. He saw the cultural blind spots others didn't even realize existed. And he saw how he could help. For the first time, he felt like he belonged. not because the room allowed it, but because he allowed himself to believe it. By the time the day ended, Arthur had spoken with every executive individually. Some were polite, some were aloof, some were cautious, a few were kind. But none dismissed him. When he stepped out of the building that evening, the city had turned golden, the streets bathed in sunset's warm glow. His breath came out in a long, slow exhale, the kind that released years of fear, years of doubt, years of believing life had only one path for people like him. He walked to his car to head home, but before he opened the door, he noticed someone standing nearby. Morgan. She wasn't wearing her usual confident posture. Her arms were folded gently, her expression soft in a way the city lights rarely saw. "I just wanted to say one more thing," she said. Arthur leaned slightly against the car. "What's that?" "Thank you," she said quietly, "not for saving the deal, but for giving me a chance to do something right. I've made a lot of mistakes these last few years. Today felt like the first step toward fixing them." Arthur studied her, seeing not the CEO everyone feared, but a woman trying, really trying, to become better than the person she had been. "You're welcome," he said sincerely, "and thank you for believing in me." Morgan's lips curved into a soft, rare smile. "Get home to your daughter." He nodded, "Always." As he drove away, the city passing in streaks of warm color, he felt something new settle inside him. Not hope, not pride, not relief. Something deeper. Freedom. He was no longer just surviving, he was living. And in a quiet office high above the streets, Morgan watched his car disappear through the glass. She had built an empire. But today she realized something. It wasn't the empire that made her powerful. It was the courage to admit she needed someone who spoke 9 languages, but who understood humanity in 100 more. And that man had finally stepped into the life he deserved.